Wot EyeJuste Dun Red.
Hello, good welcome, and whatever else you choose to say. Welcome back to Wot EyeJuste Dun Red. This is my book review show from my Bohemian book corner that aims to give a fair airing to books of all ages, not just those on the bestsellers or on the new releases lists. Thank you for joining me again, and if you are new to the channel and if you like what we do, then please do all the usual. Do like, share and subscribe, and thank you. Okay, so what are we looking at today? Well, today we will be talking about Clive Barker's Coldheart Canyon, a Hollywood ghost story. But before we do that, we just have the business of our word of the day, which is appetency. Appetency is an English word that was coined in the early 17th century, and it means a longing or desire, or a natural tendency or an affinity for something. Apparently it's derived from the Latin appetire, which means to seek after, and appetite, which is obviously the English version of the French word appétit, which means appetite. That's it. Nice and simple. I'm not sure how you'd want to use that in your own writing. I don't know, he had an appeticy for perversion? Who knows? Depends on what you're writing. Although I could probably say that does apply to Mr. Barker. So I pretty much covered the kind of like the life and times of Clive Barker in my Bullet-point Biography of him on a previous episode when I looked at Volume 6 of the Books of Blood. So I'm not going to retread old ground. If you want to see what I had to say about that, then check the description in the links below.
Strike that. Reverse it.
So yeah, so any kind of biographical stuff about Mr. Barker, for this episode I'm going to kind of confine to how it pertains to the story itself and the development of Coldheart Canyon. But first, Xadrum is more than just curious content on YouTube. We're also a small publishing house with books covering a range of genres from 1940s pulp adventure to children's novels and even a touch of the macabre for those who like their literature on the dark side. Our titles are available in both paperback and ebook formats. Ebooks are available on Amazon, but physical copies can only be bought exclusively through our website at xadrum.com. Jeff's got enough cash as it is, so why not help us little guys grow and thrive? Links can be found in our banner and in the description to all of our videos, and we look forward to helping you indulge your itch for escapism. Okay, so let's go to the blurb first of all. Actually, before I come to the blurb, sorry, I've been out of practice with these, I must admit, and so I have had a bit of a problem kind of figuring out how to connect all of the ideas and thoughts I've got about this together. So sorry if I'm a bit all over the place. Oddly enough, kind of like the book, but we'll get into that a bit more in a moment. This one came to my attention thanks to my good buddy Sam, who thought I might enjoy it and be interested to see what this one has to say about Hollywood from a more contemporary standpoint after I covered Nathaniel West's The Day of the Locust on a previous episode. If you want to see my review of that, then there should be a link up here somewhere, or up there somewhere, wherever it comes. But yeah, this one. So we start on the back here with a soundbite from Quentin Tarantino, where he just says that Barker is the great imaginer of our time. After a run of failed movies, superstar Todd Pickett elects to have extensive surgery in a desperate bid to regain his lost beauty. The procedure goes horribly wrong, grotesquely wrong. Hiding from his fans and from the press he knows will tear his reputation apart if they find out about his operation, Todd takes refuge in a place that no map of Hollywood has ever described. Coldheart Canyon. Here, nursing his wounds and his desperation, he discovers what the history of the Dream Factory has long concealed. A world somewhere between life and death, reality and illusion, where the great legends of a forgotten Hollywood are waiting to educate him in the bitter business of life after fame. As a blurb does, it kind of invites you in, it throws up some mystery and some ideas and some things like that to draw a potential reader into the book. Unfortunately, it's not entirely accurate. it for a number of reasons. We'll start with that. In the first place, there's a certain degree of hyperbole with regards to the extent of Todd's injuries following this operation. The operation in question being a face peel, a skin peel. The operation doesn't go as according to plan, but I mean, that kind of describes that he's horribly disfigured. He's kind of not, he's not auditioning for Freaked or anything like that.
Time to meet and greet the brand new you.
Which is kind of misleading. I will say, and I should say at this point, really, I know I normally try and keep things as spoiler-free as possible. I've not really been able to do that with this review, so there will be spoiler button in effect in the corner of the screen, and much like the visitors to Coldheart Canyon, enter at your own risk. So the story itself, as I said, it's supposed to be about Todd finding out about how he's supposed to live life beyond, his days as an A-lister in Hollywood around the turn of the 21st century. Unfortunately, again, that's also not true. There's a massive bait and switch in this novel. We start off with a section of the novel that is set in the golden age of Hollywood in the 20s, which sets up what happens in the part of the story and the majority of the story that takes place in a more contemporary setting. When we get into the main body of the book, yes, absolutely, Todd is our protagonist. But increasingly as the story progresses, he's by degrees replaced as our protagonist in favour of a character by the name of Tammy Lauper, who is a plus-size woman who has had a pretty crappy life and is the head of his fan club. She's an interesting enough character, and her inclusion in the story does definitely add to the story. When I was reading it, I found certain similarities between her and the character of Phoebe Cobb from Everville, which was written about 94, so I don't know, did Barker have a thing about plus-size women at the time? Don't know. Increasingly, it's revealed that this isn't Todd's story, this is her story. And I've even read interviews with Barker where he flat out says, this is her story. So, that's all very nice and stuff, but, a bait and switch is what it is at the end of the day. Finding out that the book that I've been bought and sold on this being the story of Todd Pickett, and it turns out that it's not, I did find increasingly that my interest and my emotional investment in the story did wane because of that. Because I am not getting what I was sold, if you like. But that said, Coldheart Canyon is a Clive Barker book, and Clive Barker is, as he always is, and that is eminently readable. It's not, as you can see, a small book, but there was never any point where I felt like I wasn't going to get to the end of it, which is, again, one of the brilliant things about Barker. He does, he knows how to write. There are some really nice elements in the book. There's some stuff in there that I really enjoyed. Things like this mural of tiles that forms this piece of artwork. That's one of the, I hesitate to use the word MacGuffin, but it is kind of in a way, that sets so much of the story in motion, that depicts this, mural, if you like, as I say, which is called The Devil's Country. It's an interesting invention, it's an interesting device, obviously very heavily influenced by things like The Garden of Earthly Delights by Hieronymus Bosch. And it's inventive and it's well used. I did also really like what Barker does with regards to the ghosts in this story. And that's something that I think we in the modern age kind of forget about. And he leans heavily into this concept, and something that was generally accepted prior to the invention of the camera, that ghosts more often than not appear or can manifest corporeally. And I think that was a nice way to go with them, because it challenges our preconceptions of what a ghost is, of what a ghost should be or could be, and what a ghost story should be. But it also raises questions of kind of inconsistent continuity. So just to explain, the grounds that surround the house in Coldheart Canyon, where Todd takes refuge, are inhabited by two factions, if you like. You have the ghosts, who are the spirits of the glitterati of the golden age of Hollywood from the 20s and 30s. And you also have the children, who are described as a bizarre collection of human-animal hybrids who have come into existence because the spirits, because of their connection and their involvement during their life with the house, as ghosts, they seem to exist in this almost perpetual quasi-sexual frenzy. And over the decades, when they're not copulating with each other, they've been copulating with the animals in the local area, leading to these bizarre children. But the problem is, even though they can manifest corporeally, they're still ghosts. They are still dead. They have no internal bodily functions. They don't need to eat. They don't tire. They don't feel the cold or anything like that. So how can they sire children? It's never explained. And it was just something that niggled at the back of my mind for a while until I could really put my finger on it. And again, it does, unfortunately, take away from your suspension of disbelief. But, as I have just reliably been informed, this isn't Barker's first rodeo with that concept. Apparently there's something similar in Weaveworld, which I have read and I really enjoyed, but that part, I must admit, I had forgotten. So, thank you. The other thing, a problem with the ghosts, though, as well, is that apart from a couple of flashbacks, they're little more than window dressing, with the exception of the part that they play in the climax of the story. And about that, all I can say is, sorry, just to paraphrase from somebody else, Tolkien's going to sue somebody.
I think George Lucas going to sue somebody.
Barker has gone to a lot of trouble to include the ghosts in here. And, he name drops a lot of big names from... They said, from the golden age of Tinseltown, people like Douglas Fairbanks Jr., Theda Bara, Valentino. They all appear in this story. And yet they do nothing. They're just there, as I say, apart from a couple of flashbacks. And what I was hoping and what I would love to have seen is our so-called protagonist, Todd Pickett, having an opportunity as a member of the modern A-list to talk and discourse with these people, to not even give him an opportunity to discuss the nature of fame, or even as the blurb on the back itself states, the bitter business of life after fame. You've set up the perfect opportunity for him to sit down and discuss these things with the true legends of Hollywood. And you don't. This, apparently, in Barker's own words, is a novel about the iniquities of the Hollywood experience. And it's just such a missed opportunity. I've got a few more things I want to say, but what I'm going to do is, I'm going to get this out of the way early, I think. Yeah. I'm going to go and do my I ratings now, before we go any further. So, while I go and do that, I'd suggest you pucker up, because I hear Mr. DeMille wants you for your close-up. That was nice and quick. I wanted to get that out of the way early, because it means that I don't have to break my flow later. As I was saying, Barker's always been quite vocal about the fact that this novel is his thoughts and feelings after having spent about a decade living in Hollywood. As I said, it was written and published in 2001. And it's kind of clear to me that this, at least in some ways, was influenced by the aforementioned Day of the Locust. I mean, you can tell that just from the blurb. The fact that our apparent hero is called Todd Pickett, which is clearly a nod to West's protagonist, Todd Hackett. I also then find it quite interesting with regards to one of the other characters in the book, Jerry Brahms, who is a former child star, kind of in the swan song of his time in the limelight, if you like, or having just passed beyond that. And that was quite interesting, because I did find, when I was doing some research for this, quite an interesting interview that Barker gave with what was it? With the LA Times in April 2000. The gay man in Coldheart Canyon is a part of old Hollywood. He's my friendly nod to a man I knew very well, Roddy McDowall, who I loved and, as you know, recently passed away. There's a little of Roddy in this character of Jerry Brahms. He's seen the inside of Hollywood, as Roddy has. he was a child actor, as Roddy was. So having seen that and read that, I found that quite interesting, because when I saw the character of Jerry Brahms in the story, it actually made me think, was this Barker's foil for another character from Day of the Locust, which is the upcoming child star Adore Loomis? Was he taking the line that this was kind of like a view from the other end of the road, if you like, for that type of character? Having learned that now about how he was, it was his kind of homage to Roddy McDowall, I think that doesn't quite sort of vindicate it, but I think we were kind of thinking along similar lines there, so that's quite nice. And I'd also say that there's a reasonable argument that his main antagonist in the story, Katia Lupi, is his kind of insert for, again, character from Day of the Locust, Faye Greener. But ultimately, that's kind of where any sort of meaningful comparisons between the two stops. Barker goes off very much in his own direction with the story and does tend to fall into some kind of tried and trusted Barkerisms, if you like, which I did find, from what my expectation of the book was, ended up undermining and ultimately almost obliterating what I think is the deeper subtext of what he was driving at with this book. I mean, don't get me wrong, there is some lovely stuff in here, and there's some really nice flourishes of nice prose in it. In particular, the whole section towards the beginning of the book concerning Todd's dog, Dempsey, is absolutely beautifully written. And having also learned that he wrote this book in the shadow of his own father's death, it adds another level of poignancy to that section of the story. It's not important. This I also found really strange as well, again, from looking through a lot of interviews that Barker gave about the story. In one of them he states that he wanted to inject an element of Dickens into the narrative, and that he was trying to include that in the way that the story shifts and changes tone. And I have to ask, why? I mean, clearly Dickens was a master of his craft, but Barker's also a master of his craft in his own right. So why would you feel the need to do that? It just feels completely unnecessary. It's a difficult thing to do, and it's a bit of a gamble trying to put that in your story if you're not even sure that you're going to get it right. And unfortunately, I don't think in this case Barker does. So to return again to what's probably one of the fundamental elements both of this story, of Barker's approach to it, and kind of my review as well, which is that Coldheart Canyon is his middle finger to the iniquities of Hollywood. We can't really talk about this book without at least alluding to the fact that it's one of his most sexually explicit, or at least it is, within my experience of Barker's works. And he's clearly seized onto this notion, this kind of seething lasciviousness that seems to exist in Hollywood and just in LA, possibly even just in California in general. I mean, having been to California, it is a hot place. And there are a lot of hot people in California. So, yeah. And it is kind of ubiquitous, and it's also kind of known for it as well. And he's obviously taken on to this idea of what that kind of level of perversion could drive you to or lead you to if the conditions are right. And obviously the conditions in Coldheart Canyon are the right conditions for something bizarre and wonderful to happen. Again, it's a fascinating concept. It's an interesting idea to play with. But I'm not sure he's achieved it, or at least I'm not sure if what he was going for comes off as he'd intended. There's one scene in particular, which I can't remember what it's called in the book. It's something like In the Garden with Friends or something like that, which is kind of when Todd first encounters the ghosts en masse. And Barker's injected quite a lot of sensuality into that scene. But most of the other scenes that of a sexually explicit nature are quite brutish and almost matter of fact. And that juxtaposition it creates a disassociation that also kind of robs it of any kind of deeper meaning. Which again is probably the point. I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case. Is that it is so it's that kind of almost mechanized sexuality, if you like. Which again does work, but I don't know, it's the same kind of thing that I have with The Boys. The kind of in-your-face sexuality in that. It's nice as a gimmick, but it wears off very quickly. And if you've got nothing else to replace it with, then the whole thing just kind of falls flat. That's probably a good way of describing ultimately how I felt about this book, is it just feels flat. And then I read the epilogue, which is so unnecessary. It feels tacked on. It feels like it was written a year after the rest of the book was completed. It's about 22 pages of completely wasted prose. I say 22, the epilogue is actually about 26 pages. Chapter 3 of the epilogue, which is about 4 pages long, should have been the epilogue. It's brilliant, it's very well written, it has a veneer of the haunting, of the sublime about it, and it perfectly wraps up the story. All of the stuff before it in the epilogue is completely unnecessary. It's predictable. There was nothing in it that I needed to know about these characters. It's also interesting reading this book in, I suppose, what we can call the autumn of the LGBTQ and woke madness. Reading that as well, because it's almost like Barker is saying that the virtues that you need to have to survive this story are either being a middle-aged gay man, a plus-sized woman coming into her power because she's been downtrodden all of his life, mostly because of inadequate men, or a woman in her 50s who, apropos to nothing, with nothing in the preceding 700-odd pages, suddenly decides in her mid-50s that she wants to clash unctuous clams with other women. There is nothing in the character of Maxine Frizzell that suggests that she's a lesbian. Up until the epilogue. I did have a look at a few places and a few sites that have reviewed it, in particular Goodreads. And it's curious that from over 2,000 reviews for Coldheart Canyon, the one-star reviews only account for about 3%. It's about 200 reviews in total, and I had a skim through quite a few of them. But they all pretty much say the same thing. That they found that the book was a mess, that it's tonally inconsistent, characters' motivations shift and change for no reason at all. It feels almost like a parody in places where everybody needs to go and do something because somebody needs saving. So they go and save them. And then 2 minutes later they need saving again from something else. And I can't disagree with them, unfortunately. The epilogue itself is a perfect example of that. So when it comes to recommending this book, or if I recommend that you should read it, well, if you're a die-hard Barker fan, then nothing I've said here is going to change your mind. You're going to read it anyway. I mean, it came out 24 years ago. Chances are you probably already have. If you're new to Barker, I wouldn't say start here. I'd say if you want to read it as a completionist, yeah, go ahead at some point. But if you're new to it, I'd say look at some of his other novels. The aforementioned Everville is a good one. Weaveworld is a good one as well, or just leap into the Books of Blood, because they're amongst some of the best of his stuff. But when it comes to my actual I ratings itself, in terms of the content, I'm still having to judge it on 2 different criteria. One is just how I found the content of the book in its own right, but also because of why I came into reading this book, whether or not I think it's a modern successor, or contemporary successor, should I say, to Day of the Locust. On that second point, no, it's not. I don't think it is at all. For me, it felt like where Barker approaches his material with a rusty butcher's knife, Nathaniel West is using a sterilised scalpel. There is one perspective when you look at this book where I think he has succeeded, but I'll touch a bit on that in a moment. So I'll go very quickly now to our eyes. In terms of the product itself, don't really have anything to say about that. It is a pretty average paperback, perfectly legible, no problems. It was pretty good. I don't think I noticed any typos in there. So, yeah, it's okay. So that's kind of where we're going to go with this. Here we go. So for the product, it's an okay paperback, a 2-star, or 2i, excuse me. But I am going to give it a 2i as is for the content as well. It's okay. I had to deliberate quite a bit on that. I didn't know whether to make it a 3 because there are some nice elements in it. But again, as I said, towards the end, I was like, ugh. And as I said, because I felt so flat about the whole thing, I didn't want to give it a 1. And those nice elements are what brings it up to being okay. So before I wrap up and we look at what I'm going to be reading next, a couple of really sort of final points. And one of them is, as I was saying a moment ago, there is a perspective when you look at this book that I think the message that Barker was trying to convey does work. And that's this. If you take a step back from the minutiae of the narrative and absorb that kind of banality, that very surface level aspect of it. And that's again ubiquitous to, as I've been saying, the Hollywood experience, and how that makes you, or how it made me feel reading the book. And if you examine that and look at that from a macro or from a meta perspective, then yes, I would say that what Barker has achieved here does kind of pierce that facade and go to the heart of the Hollywood experience. And as a piece of social commentary, that's actually really clever. But the problem is, to achieve that, you've still had to serve up to your reader a book that is unsatisfactory. And as a reader, that for me isn't acceptable. I don't want to read and not like a book for you to get your message across. And the last two things I want to say really are from another interview that Barker gave to IGN Movies in, when was it? December 1999, obviously about a year or so before the book's release. I'm writing a short novel right now. It's a book about Hollywood. It's my attempt to sort of summarise, I suppose, my feelings, both good and bad, about this town, in a book which is primarily reality-based. That is to say that it doesn't go off to any alternative world or anything, but has a touch of the supernatural about it, but just a touch. I'm sorry, what? Where's that book? I want to read that book, because this does go to other worlds. From that's the book I wanted to read. And in fact, that's what I thought I was reading. So the final point really I want to say about any of this is to allude back to, I think, one of the things I said at the end of my review for Day of the Locust. When I finished that book, I could quite happily have sat down, flicked back to the beginning and read it again. Coldheart Canyon is going to be gathering dust on a shelf somewhere. So that's it. That's my thoughts on Clive Barker's Coldheart Canyon. Obviously, as I say, they are simply my thoughts as a reader. If you've read it and you enjoyed it, good for you. I'm glad you managed to get something out of it that clearly I haven't and clearly can't. But we shall move on to what I shall be reading next. And I actually got this last year, but I was waiting till the appropriate time of year to read it. And that is Winter Tales, a collection of animal fables from around the world for folk of all ages. This is by Jackie Carriera and her partner AJD. AJ is actually a friend of mine, so thank you for the book and for the chance to review this. So that will be up next. It's not too long, so hopefully you shouldn't have to wait too long before the next one of these. I'm going to wrap myself up warm and get cozy with the animals. That's not what I meant. So, get thee gone. View as well is that.
Oh, sorry, mate.
Did I say something funny? I'm sorry.
My body just went, no, get it out now.
It's okay. It's all good, buddy. It's all good.
Apologies.
That's all right, man. So to return again to